Hi, Ed. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
As you know, recently I've done a couple podcasts where I have interviewed people. Before that, it's always been about connecting Torah to the lives that we live, and that's really important to me, and I know it's very important to you also. But I asked you to sit in on this one because you're coming to the end of your tenure as a president of B'nai Torah congregation, which I happen to believe is a very esteemed position. And you've done it as long, if not longer, than anybody else in the history of the congregation. So I'd like to do a little bit of reflection on that, what it's meant to you, what you saw as the greatest challenges, where were the great joys of doing this, and perhaps some advice you might have to your successor or the successive presidents who come into place.
Sure.
So first of all, thank you, and Mazel Tov. It was really an extraordinary reign that you had, a period of time that was where we were confronted with great challenges, and I think that we're like our heads are on and we're doing pretty well. So tell us about your decision to become the president. I know that you hadn't been here very long.
So I had been treasurer for a couple of years, and then I was slated to be executive vice president, which would have been a 2-year run up to being president. And then the president left early, and I sort of jumped in, earlier than planned. And so it was, jumping into the fire a little bit, and had to learn on the fly. So it was a little bit rocky getting started, but it turned out to be a great experience, except for the pandemic that sort of hit us 6 months later.
Right. You came from Indiana. You had been here a few years, right, before you became the president. Were you a president of the synagogue there?
I was president of the synagogue there for a few years.
Can you compare those two roles?
Very different. I mean, we had up north, we had the rabbi, a part-time bookkeeper, and a part-time secretary, and that was the staff, and minimal activities. And obviously here, where there is a team, a large team, and so it was no comparison to the scope of what the synagogue did in the programming.
What were the rewards in doing this job?
One was a sense of accomplishment. I mean, you can't get through. I can't ignore the pandemic. I mean, a once in 100-year event, and it hit every organization in the world, literally. So surviving that and then thriving coming out of it is probably the thing I'm most proud of. And so that was a great sense of accomplishment. And, getting to know so many people. We'd only been here a few years when I became president, and I know so many people and so many wonderful people in this congregation that I never would have been able to meet if not for the position I had.
This may be a difficult question for you to answer. You may be too humble to answer the question. On the other hand, maybe not, because you're self-reflective enough. What do you think are your personal characteristics and strengths that allowed you to be so successful?
One, I don't have a problem being humble and letting other people do their thing and take the spotlight for the job, that they did. And, I had a financial background, which I think, again, coming back to the pandemic, helped us survive it and plan for it, not necessarily survive it, but to at least plan for it so that we could have some confidence that we would survive it, and then come out of it in good shape. Mm-hmm. So I think those are probably two of the...
I could point to a few others. I know that, I'm sure that your background in accounting was very, very helpful. You have an astute awareness of numbers and budgets, which obviously is something that's really important for any leader in an organization such as this that has almost a $9 million annual budget. But there's something else. And I would like to speak to your daughters and your wife about this. And that is, you never were reactive. You always were reflective on what was happening, and you allowed a process to move on without jumping into it. And then you made a decision. It's a reflection of a particular type of emotional maturity that I think is really important to bring to the table. So you want to
So,
comment on
so,
that?
so
What would your
one of
daughter
my
say?
favorite movies is Apollo 13.
Okay.
And in that movie, you know, the astronauts are stuck in space and they're not sure they can get back and they're not sure they have enough oxygen and what's going to happen to them. And they show a scene in that movie, I think it's Chris Kraft is the mission commander, and everybody around him is like going crazy. What are we going to do? And he tells everybody, calm down, just work the problem. Just work the problem. And it's like,
That's an old movie, right? That's
right,
from the
it's a,
90s.
right,
Yeah.
right. So it's just, you know, don't freak out over things. Just do what you can do, you know, work the issues, and you'll come to a decision that everybody can be comfortable with if you go through the process. And I think that's sort of the way what I learned through in the business world, and I think it applied here as well.
42 years in the rabbinate taught me a number of things. One of which, if there's a problem that comes to me, and I don't get towards solving it right away, more often than not, it resolves itself before I even get to it. So that there's a sense when we're leaders that we want to fix it, but sometimes we have to wait to see if it fixes itself or how other people can fix it. The other there was a wonderful book, and I've told you about it, written by a former rabbi who's a psychologist in Washington, D.C. His name is Friedman, and he wrote a book about church and synagogue and family systems. And one of the things that he says about leadership, and this book was written for clergy, but it's true with synagogue presidents also, is that perhaps the most important characteristic of a leader is to have a non-anxious presence. So when everybody, as you said, when everybody is like, you know, all baffled and freaking out, you're able to like see what's going on and put first things first and then begin to respond to those things. There's another element of your presidency that needs to be pointed out, and that is you modeled a particular type of religious behavior, both in terms of your attendance at morning minyan, and now it's regular because you're saying Kaddish, but also in your commitment to learning. So you've always taken a lot of classes here, and you do Daf Yomi from the Talmud, and you get up every Shabbat morning, and you teach Talmud, and no matter how many eyes are rolling, you keep doing it. You roll on, but it's really been a critical component, and it says something about what we are, who we are, and what we're made of as a congregation, that you value that.
Yeah, so I mean that's how I got started. I was coming to Minyan every morning, and that's how I got to know, you know, a number of people, including the rabbis and everybody at Minyan, and that's I think how I got started in my involvement with the synagogue. But it's also a way where I get to meet so many more people by being at Minyan, and it made obviously being retired made it easier to be around here. More often than not, if need be for classes or whatever. And then I was here to talk to the staff and talk to you on a more frequent basis than if I was working.
Right.
And so it sort of enhanced my involvement.
Especially during the early days of COVID. I mean, we
Right.
were on the phone with each other
Right.
6 hours a day.
Right. We were constant Zoom calls. Yes.
Yeah,
Remember those days.
I do too. There was another element here that also I think was unusual to your presidency, and that is that you were a part of the staff meetings on a regular basis. Other presidents would drop in now and then, but you knew what the staff was doing, and you gave them a lot of reinforcement, a lot of positive reinforcement for the staff people to see that the lay leadership appreciates what they do and supports what they do is very important.
Yeah. I mean, I started doing that during COVID because we didn't know how we were going to do, what we were going to do.
Yeah.
But I continued afterwards, and I think it became a bridge to the rest of the congregation because if I knew what was being planned, it was easier for me to communicate to congregants what was upcoming or go back to the staff and say, people like this, or maybe they would have preferred doing something a little bit differently, and I could be that go-between between the congregation and the staff.
Yeah. We had a president years ago here who said that the best words for a leader to hear are the following three words: immediate past president. So you will be the immediate past president soon. I hope that you enjoy that role also, and I think that role takes certain amount of discretion too, as I'm thinking about and as you've warned me about becoming a retiring rabbi.
Right.
I look forward to walking into the sunset together with you. And I say to everybody, next Friday night, we're going to be honoring Ed for his service as the president of the congregation with a very special dinner. I encourage you to call the synagogue and make a reservation to join us next Friday night. It should really be a beautiful night for not just for Ed and his family, but for the entire congregation as we express our appreciation. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom, and thank you, Rabbi.